بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وآله وصحبه ومن والاه اللهم يا منور يا فتاح نور قلوبنا بنور معرفتك وافتح لنا أبواب حكمتك وانشر علينا خزائن رحمتك إنك على كل شيء قدير اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وإخلاصا وصدقا في الدين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وصلي اللهم وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We begin in the name of God Almighty. We beseech Him to send His peace and blessings upon our beloved Master and Prophet Muhammad and upon his family and upon his companions and upon all of those who walk in his path of excellence until the last day. Alhamdulillah. So this is our fourth class, alhamdulillah, in this series in theology. And we're using a text by one of the seminal post-classical scholars of Islam known as Imam al-Sanūsī, rahimahullah ta'ala, or Imam al-Sanūsī. And the text that we're using is actually called صغرى, the Redacted Minor. And because there are some new people here, I feel like I should probably take it back, or at least to a certain degree, just review maybe, which would be good for us too, alhamdulillah. So welcome everyone, mashallah. So what we said was, and this is the argument that we gave for the existence of God, which is not necessarily the first thing that is looked at in a theology text. The first thing that is looked at in a theology text is what? Yeah, what kind of theory? It's everyone's favorite word in this class.
Epistemology.
Epistemology, yes. And what does epistemology mean, Amr?
What is knowledge?
Good, yeah. What is knowledge?
Yeah,
that's good. What is knowledge? It's the nature of knowing, the sources of knowledge. How do you know what you know, basically, is the question that epistemology asks. And so once we square that away and we recognize that we have different types of judgments, then we have rational judgments, and those have three types, something that's necessary, possible, and impossible. We then begin our journey into actually proving the existence of God, and then from there, all of the other 13 attributes in total that we're going to look at in terms of what is necessary for God, which then brings us into the subject of prophetology. So that begins kind of our look at ilahiyat, or divinity, which then goes into prophetology. And then from prophetology, we go into sam'iyat, which are matters of faith that we take based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us. And so that becomes more or less the journey that one takes in theology. So, the proof for the existence of God, we said, is what is known as dalil al-huduth, the temporal origination of the world, which in itself also has an entailment, which is known as the contingency argument. All right? How does this argument work? Well, we say, first and foremost, existence is a given. The Sunni ulama in general are not going to sit around and debate whether or not we exist, and whether or not you exist, and things are real and whatnot. There was some discussion given to that. Typically, the sophists of the Greek intellectual tradition branch into three broad categories, and those categories are explored in terms of what type of skepticism was prevalent at the time. But generally speaking, if someone wants to debate you in terms of whether or not you actually exist and they actually exist, my recommendation is walk away and move on with your life, because that's stupidity with a capital S. No one operates like that. No one functions like that. So, and our ulama, they would just give funny answers to these things oftentimes. They would tell you just slap the person in the face. And if they say something to you, be like, well, how do you know I exist? I didn't do anything. How do you know I exist? And if they say, no, you did do that, then khalas, they've rejected their own argument, and you can begin a conversation with them. Don't do that. Right? But in other words, it's a given, self-evident. You don't need to sit around and debate that. Well, we shouldn't be trying to convert anyone. We should be trying to have clear communication with people and, invite them to explore with us the realities of this world, the truth that exists there, if we take that seriously, and we can kind of go on an exploration with one another. But converting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who converts people. Say, Ya muqallib al-qulub, right? Thabbit qalbi ala dinik. Oh, the turner of hearts. That's not us. Otherwise, it would have been us. We're the ones turning hearts. We don't turn hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who turns hearts. So the best thing that you can do is grow in your capacity to love people and to serve people. That's my advice. But there are arguments, obviously, and those arguments are real for us, and they provide the foundations for our religion. So, existence is a given. Then we look at the world. We realize that the world is composed of physical objects and the properties of physical objects. Does everybody know what I mean by that? A physical object is a spatially extended object, a spatially located object. That's what we mean by a physical object. So you have physical objects, something that's spatially located, and the property of spatially located objects. And generally what we're talking about here is something that exists in a location, or the property of something that exists in a location. And then we said, well, everything in the world is spatially located. And this is actually something that we derive based on a basic sense perception that we have of the world and a necessary entailment of that sense perception. And since everything in the world is spatially located, or the property of something that is spatially located, it means it's possible of existence. It means it's contingent. Does everybody understand what that term means? What does contingent mean? Yeah.
Is it something that needed to have something that depends on another thing for its creation?
Good. MashaAllah. That's a perfect definition. Something that is dependent on something other than itself for its existence. So, something that is physical, that is contingent, that's possible in and of itself, we would say, is something that is reliant or dependent on other than itself to explain for its existence in the way that it is. In other words, if, this book, for example, if it were here, it could have been here, could be here, no problem. It's a particular size, could have been a little bit bigger, could have been a little bit smaller, etc. It has other properties. It might have a color to it, it might not have a color to it, so on and so forth. So that was the world. The entirety of the world, we would say, is that. It is a set of contingent things. And in fact, if our opponent is like a really die-hard materialist atheist dude, we can be like, okay, we don't really have a problem with that because the majority of Ahl Sunnah on the question of the world said that the world is actually contingent existence. It's all physical. In other words, we don't have a problem with it being physical. Sure, all created things are physical. Even though later on, some of the scholars debated and said it's possible for some created things to be immaterial. In other words, to not be spatially located. Okay, so some of the ulama who hold that this was a possibility said that in fact there are certain things that are immaterial, and one of those things would have been the soul, the human soul, for example. So that's a position that some of the scholars of Ahl Sunnah held, and the soul for them is actually something that is immaterial. It's not spatially located, but it has a relationship to the human body of control and some kind of sense experience. Yeah.
Would the same thing pertain to angels, since they are made of light and they're but
It's a good question. But the answer to that question generally is that the angels are made of light, and light is something that is spatially located. So it's jism latif. It's a subtle body.
Can humans talk with angels?
Yeah. The companions did it. Did they not? The hadith of Jibreel, the man who came, sat down next to the Prophet, spoke. We learn after the hadith is over that that was actually an angel who took the form of a human being. No problem. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with this, but immaterial, yes. So some of the ulama held that the soul is immaterial. You know, they go back and forth. And, you know, they would say it's attached to the human body, but in a non-spatial way, right? And i.e. it's an immaterial substance. And that's the soul. We won't get into all of this, though. But it's still contingent, right? And it's still in need of a cause. And even though it's an immaterial substance, it's still in need of a cause. Okay, so anyways, we have a world. The world is either eternal, i.e. it did not begin to exist, or it began to exist, right? This is where I want to begin to look at the possibilities here now, all right? So you have some rational categories that we can begin to show. So you can say that the world is either eternal and caused, or it is eternal and uncaused, or the world began and was caused, or the world began and was uncaused. Okay? Is that an exhaustive list? Can anybody think of something else?
If you're just using those two things, yeah. Here. If there's only two factors in the matrix, then yes.
Okay. So no challenges to this.
Can you tell me how you came up with those? Can you, just why is it only began or eternal? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, is there?
Eternal or caused or uncaused? Yeah. Are there any other?
I'm asking. Yeah. Let's see. Maybe there's a Nobel Prize winner sitting in our midst here, and we can begin to think about a completely different dimension.
No beginning, no end.
Yeah. What about Islamic years? The 3,000, that's how long Earth's been last?
No.
Like those definitions, there should be no other option.
What are we saying by those definitions?
I
I want all the definitions. Any definition that you can think of, give it to me. Go.
I feel like matter needs to be in here somewhere.
What's matter?
Just, what is matter? Something that takes up space. Something that's tangible. Something.
Interestingly,
Well, you still have to ask the same question.
Yeah, that's
Is it eternal? Or did it begin? Is it caused or is it uncaused?
We're not arguing whether it exists or not exists. We're already starting with the assumption that it exists.
Exactly. The world exists, correct? And we just said that the world...
non-existence.
Sure, so we can say it just doesn't exist. But like I said before, I don't really care to have that debate, right? Are we all here right now and existing? Anybody want to debate that? If you do, I don't know what to tell you. Came to the wrong place. Yeah.
I was just going to say that, isn't it caused or uncaused because we're trying to argue that the Most High God created the earth and everything?
Sure. I mean, we want to argue. This is what we want to argue. Okay? But we're going to go through this process together and just see like where this ends up. All right?
Okay, can I throw another one in there?
Sure.
Tell me where this concept of something being dynamic or something being independent. So this idea that I initiated something and it just perpetuates itself based on rules that I established.
Well, so it would still be caused.
Sure, but is it continuously caused or is it initially caused? So I'm fine with caused and uncaused capturing what I'm saying, but do you recognize what I'm positing?
To a certain extent. I mean, you can say, like we talked about last week, the difference between something being infinite and indefinite. Something that's infinite is something that does not have a beginning. Something that is indefinite could have a beginning, right? And you would assume, as a matter of fact, that it does, and it just is indefinitely being sustained into a particular direction. We went over infinite regress, so I don't know what to do with the people that... We'll go through it, inshallah. Anyways, these are the options. They're exhaustive. That's my point. If someone doesn't think they're exhaustive and thinks, no, you're missing this other category, let me know. Okay. So these are the four that exist. We want to argue this one, but we'll go through them, like I said before, just to kind of see where they lead us. So, eternal and caused. If it's eternal, all the eternal options in our previous class we actually knocked out. Does everybody remember how?
Process of elimination?
Yeah, but there was...
Is it the Hubble telescope and the expansion?
Well, so that's, physics. The physics world went a particular direction, that's fine. But we actually, using our rational categories, could also demonstrate that the world being eternal is impossible. Why was it impossible?
It has to be an initial cause.
Infinite regress.
Wasn't it the coin thing?
Infinite regress.
Okay.
Yes, infinite regress. Okay? The impossibility of something going infinitely into the past was the reason why we said that an eternal world is impossible. However, before we go there, you can either say that the world is eternal and uncaused, or you can say that the world is eternal and caused. If we're looking at the world being eternal and caused, which is the position, by the way, of the Muslim peripatetics, the philosophers or the falasifa. So like Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd and these thinkers, that was their position. It's very problematic. Ignoring the fact that it's false, because it's impossible for the world to have no beginning, given the impossibility of infinite regress, it has other significant issues, and we can leave that to the side for now. We'll talk about it actually when we start discussing the attributes, inshallah. So if you say the world has no beginning, we will reject that on the basis of the impossibility of infinite regress. Yeah.
So just to clarify, I feel like the top... I feel like the top and the bottom are contradictory to each other. Like, can anything exist within those realms? Like, can something actually be eternal but caused at the same time?
Good.
And likewise, can anything have begun but
I agree with you.
be uncaused at the same time?
Right. Yes.
So really, the spectrum that we're working with is in the middle.
Yes.
Two pairs in the middle, right?
And we can demonstrate why. So the idea of talking about the impossibility of infinite regress is simply us saying that we can demonstrate to you why this is impossible. That's all it is. All right? The other option is to say, okay, well, the world had a beginning. So one of these two. The world had a beginning. Now, we can say the world had a beginning and was uncaused. Let's think about that together. Does that make sense? No, not science. Yeah, it's the position of some predominantly atheistic scientists. Yes. Yeah. So the whole Lawrence Krauss thesis is kind of sits in this realm, right? The question that we're actually asking with this is, can it pop into existence without a cause?
Spontaneously.
Exactly. Or chance, or random. Choose your buzzword.
So something came from nothing?
Exactly.
Okay.
Are we okay with that?
I'm not.
It's a logical contradiction. Why?
Because in order for something to come from nothing, there had to be some inkling of something that caused the larger thing to happen, which inherently means that there was something before that thing.
Good. So that's one way of arguing this point. But what's to say that it didn't just pop into existence? Just random. Not itself creating itself, but just...
Like if there was nothing.
There's just nothing and then there was something.
Nothing. Like there's nothing to even for something to become anything because there's nothing.
I think it's because everything physical is contingent.
This guy is dropping the mic tonight. MashaAllah. You took this class with me before, though. That's exactly it. It's exactly it. So what does it mean to be contingent?
Something had to cause it.
Something had to cause it. Yes. So when we look at our starting point, we said that the world is made up of contingent things, which means another way to say the world is simply, in this particular light, is simply the set of all contingent things that exist. So, and these things we just said are spatially located. They're physical objects. So for the world to come into existence without a cause, what we're really trying to say is that these contingent things that have dimension and have weight and are in a particular time, etc., occurred without any explanation for their occurrence. But by their very essence, they require an explanation for their occurrence. Is everybody with me on this? Okay? So, and you go back to the coin example that I gave. All right? You're left, obviously, with questions that are going to remain unanswered. And as a matter of fact, there will be a whole range of questions that emerge from this proposition which are going to remain unanswered. And the fact of the matter is, they should be answerable. Like, these contingent things exist. Okay, well, there must be a reason. It's absurd to think that anything that is contingent came into existence without any reason. And, you know, given on top of that they have all these very specific features for no reason. So that's absurd, right? So the way they describe it is that the world is possible of itself, and everything contained within it is likewise possible. And if something is possible of existence, contingent, another way to say that is contingent, okay? If something is contingent or possible of existence, it means its existence and its non-existence are completely equal. It could have existed or it could not have existed. No logical contradiction would emerge from us assuming either one of those possibilities, which is the reason why we say it's possible or contingent. So then, to say that one of those possibilities then dominates over the other without anything external is absurd. Because there's nothing about the world itself, okay, being that it is contingent, that can explain why one of these two equal possibilities has overcome the other. Everybody got that? And we talked a little bit about this. So if you're first time hearing this, go back to the classes prior on YouTube and see how we go through this argument in a variety of different ways so that you can understand it better. All right? So if you believe that the world began, like Bertrand Russell and some of others believe, okay? But you still want to hold that it happened without a cause, then that is what we call mukabara. Mukabara. In Adab al-Bahth wal-Munadhara, they would say that this is mukabara, which is coming from kibr, like a baseless denial. Right? So that's that. This doesn't work. And this doesn't work. Because the world can't be eternal. Right? And this doesn't work.
Second one works if we're talking about God, though, right?
This?
Yeah?
Eternal and uncaused?
Allah is non-contingent and He's eternal.
No, we're talking about the world.
Right, no, I know.
Yeah, this
I know
is
we're
all.
talking about the world, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
could the second one apply to, in fact, we could run the same exercise with God and recognize that only one of the four makes sense. Right?
What do you mean? You mean that God began?
No, I'm saying God wouldn't be that one, but He would be the one above it. And the other three would not work.
Oh, sure. You could say, I mean, yeah, we are obviously going to say that He's eternal and uncaused.
Which kind of goes back to the point he was making, that the first one and the last one are essentially paradoxical. So there couldn't be anything for which the first pairing and the second pairing, or the last pairing, make any sense.
This one and this one.
Yeah, like those are just paradoxical in nature and how they're spelled out.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves us with everything is either the world or God.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, we're trying to go through an exhaustive approach of thinking about the world itself. Okay? And so these are the options. The world exists in a particular way. We all agreed upon that. We looked out, said everything is a physical object or the property of a physical object. Means that it's changing. If it's changing, it's contingent. All right? And so then we begin to try and analyze, okay, where does this lead us to? Well, the world could either be eternal and caused, eternal uncaused, began and caused, or began uncaused. It can't be eternal because of the impossibility of infinite regress. So these two are out. And it can't have begun and be uncaused because of the rational principle that we just gave, right? That if something is contingent, it means that its existence and non-existence are both equally possible. They're both equal to one another. So to try to say that one dominated over the other in and of itself, uncaused, right? One dominated over the other in and of itself is to try and postulate that it is both equal to its opposite and greater than its opposite. Yes?
Why is it contingent? It's created by God. I mean, God can create the world without any contingency.
So what does contingent mean?
Condition.
The nature of something that is contingent. Something that's contingent of existence.
It's not going to happen unless something else will
Right, so really what we're saying here is that its existence and non-existence are both equally possible. That's what something that is contingent means. So if something is contingent, i.e. it's possible, i.e. its existence and non-existence are both equally possible, it necessitates for something external to it to cause it. And the reason is because for it to dominate over the other possibility that it has, it requires something external to it. Because we just said that both of those possibilities are equal to one another. So let me give you an example. A coin. All right, this is the example that I gave in the last class. You have a coin. Heads or tails? Do we even use coins anymore? I don't know. I still, yeah. Yeah, everybody's on Apple Pay. Okay. Heads or tails, correct?
Correct.
What's the possibility that it lands on heads?
50.
What's the possibility that it lands on tails? 50%. Both of them are completely equal to one another, correct? All right. Now, is it possible for us to say then that heads ended up dominating over tails without anything external to the coin itself? Why? Who said yes? Explain. Hold your contention for a second. Okay, let's go back. Can that happen?
Unless you do changes to the coin.
Something other than the coin had to have done something to the coin, correct?
Yeah, but it's still 50-50. That applies to both sides.
No, that's true. My point is to say heads, 50%, and tails, 50%, right? Or 1/2, 1/2. Those two things are completely equal to one another, which means that heads is completely equal to tails. All right? Now let's say heads dominated over tails. We look at the coin it's heads. Okay? Could that have happened in and of itself? Are the probabilities contained within the coin itself for heads to have dominated over tails?
Yes.
How?
Maybe like the weight and then the kinetic energy being used with it. Like,
So that would still be something that's external to the coin.
Yeah.
The answer to this question is no. That's impossible. Why is it impossible, Fouad? It's impossible because if we're saying heads determined over tails, we're saying that heads is greater than tails. But we just said that heads is equal to tails. Which means that we're trying to now postulate that heads is both equal to tails and greater than tails. That's a logical contradiction. It's impossible. We apply that to the world.
But the world is different. The world existed because God decided to create this world. And He created it in a certain number of days. That was able to just make it happen like from nowhere.
Yeah, we don't disagree. I mean, we're not. All we're talking about is that the world exists and its existence is contingent. The world exists and its existence is contingent. The existence of the world is contingent. Yeah? So contingent means its existence or non-existence are equally possible. Means that the world can either exist or not exist, and both of those things are equally possible. No, stay with me. If there's something that you feel like I don't get it, let's keep talking.
Okay, but
Because everybody's benefiting, by the way, from this. Yeah, go ahead.
the question here is, I'm not following why we are asking this question
Why are we asking the question of what?
of the equally existed or not existed. I mean, to prove the existence of the world, or what's the?
Yeah, because we said so we begin, our starting point is that things exist. You're here. What's your name? Sulaiman. Fouad. Okay? So you're here, and I'm here. And you're sitting on a chair, and I'm standing, and we're in a building, and I'm moving, and you're moving, and everything around you is changing. Okay? One location, another location, right? Okay. That means that it's contingent. That means that it's contingent. Why? Because you exist, you didn't have to exist. And you have particular properties within you that could be different than they are right now. There's nothing necessary about the way that you are or where you are or anything like that. Or that you are. Okay? So you're contingent. And what I'm saying is that the human being, the first realization that the human being can make is that the entirety of the universe, because we're talking about a physical object and a set of physical objects and the properties of those physical objects, are all contingent. Everything in the world is contingent. We come to that realization. It could have existed, it could not have existed. Both are equally possible for everything that we see around us and the world itself. Okay? Which means that we would say it needs a cause. Okay? Now, when we begin to speculate on the reality of this world, we can say that one of these four options have to be granted to the way that we conceptualize how all of this got here. Because we just said it's not necessary. We're not necessarily where we are. Okay? Could have been eternal. We said no. The reason is because infinite regress is impossible. So, whether we're going to say that the world is eternal and caused or eternal and uncaused, both of those don't work because the world cannot be eternal. So then we say, okay, well then it began. Could it have begun and was uncaused? And we also ruled that out. The world began, and there must have been a cause. So we're left with this. That's where we are right now. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. So from that point, what we want to try and begin to think about, since we're left with this, the world began and it was caused, we want to ask the question then, well, okay, so what caused it? All right? Now, there are a number of ways that we can then develop, okay, from here. We can say, well, it was either caused by itself or it was caused by something else.
Caused by itself. That's not possible.
Why not?
How's that different than infinite regress? How could the cause be itself? It's cause and effect. The effect cannot be the cause. Like, you can't, it's an infinite loop that goes nowhere.
Right. Does everybody see that? In order for something to have created itself, it would have to have existed before itself. But since it was not in existence, it, can't create itself. Anybody have any qualms with that?
What about, does that mean that it's impossible to clone yourself?
No, but you're in existence. You're in existence. Yeah.
A new clone is created.
Philosophy, is that clone actually yours?
No, that clone is not you.
I mean, it's a good question.
It's like you.
It still is, yeah, but the point that I'm trying to make is, did it come from non-existence?
No, it came from me.
So it was in existence, something that was in existence. And it's not and then there's also another issue with that in the sense that it's not the same ein thing, right? Like the way that they talk about is the same self, right? It's actually a different.
Like even I'm not recreating myself per se, but I'm creating another version of me.
Right. It's not the same self.
Didn't exist before, then it would be impossible.
Mm.
Like even the DNA will mutate. If you look at the DNA, I'm serious. It actually looks different. I mean, not for yeah.
That's actually a very good point. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very good point. What did he say? The DNA would still be different.
Right. Mutation, right.
Yeah. So it's different now. So the point is that it's nonsense, right? How can it bring itself into existence if it didn't exist? How can something not in existence bring anything into existence? It's not even a thing. It's non-existent, right? So that's impossible, all right? So this doesn't work. It's impossible. What about something else creating it, causing it? Seems to work, right? And that's our option, obviously. Now you can say, well, that's something else that caused it, okay? Either that thing was also created by something else that is itself contingent, right? Which then is also created by something else which is contingent, which is also created by something else that is contingent. I.e., everything now is caused by the set of things that immediately precede it in time. And those things were caused by a set of things that immediately precede those things in time all the way to, let's say, the Big Bang, all right? And then the Big Bang popped out of another universe, which is a physical thing, and so on ad infinitum, to no beginning. Does that work? No. Why? Because we're back to infinite regress again, okay? And that's impossible. So that means the only other type of existence that could have brought it about, since we've ruled out anything that is contingent bringing it about, would be a necessary being. All right? So as we said before, if we wanted to try and say another universe somehow brought this thing that then caused us, okay, which itself is contingent, it wouldn't work. It goes into infinite regress. So the only thing that does work then is the other option, something that's necessary. And obviously we don't even consider something that is impossible, because something that's impossible doesn't exist. So this doesn't work, and so you're left having to substantiate that the world exists because the necessary being caused it to exist. All right?
In regards to the impossible.
Everybody understood that? Anybody? Okay.
So, I don't really get that. So how, if something is impossible and it can't exist, but isn't something which is infinite non-existent? Like, it's not physically sort of tangibly existent, as we know it. Does that make sense?
No.
Like, if the incontingent thing is an infinite sort of like wellspring, if you will, like an entity that facilitates everything else in the world.
Now, are you saying non-contingent, i.e. a necessary thing? Impossible things aren't things.
Oh, they're not things.
They're nothing.
But, because like isn't the notion, the concept, like fathoming God is also impossible.
So that's different.
Okay.
Yeah, that's different. Fathoming God, I mean, when we're talking about this, we're not saying that we have, a conceptualization of the nature of the necessary being.
Okay.
We're saying that whatever caused us to begin has to be a necessary being. It cannot have been a contingent being, and we don't entertain the idea of impossible being, because there's no such, the impossible things don't exist. Good?
Yep.
Any questions about this? Yeah.
How deep does Islam say? I mean, it talks about 7 heavens. I mean, 7 layers after Earth. I mean, how deep does like Earth or space go? And because it's all like you think about the moon, and like we're all our calendars off Islamic calendar, the moon, like Ramadan.
Right.
all the months.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, it all depends on our Earth.
Mhm.
How deep? Like, what else does it talk about that could potentially affect us here on Earth?
I don't know if I understand the question. So are you saying like,
Like the moon is like part of us in a sense, like how we have like.
yeah, I mean, it's part of us in the sense that it's a physical object.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's contingent. It's moving, right? It's in orbit, so on and so forth, which means it's contingent. It could have been another way. Could have not had an orbit. Nothing impossible about that. So that's why I'm saying that first lesson where we talked about epistemology is so crucial to the Muslim mind. Inculcating that within the mind of every Muslim is essential for you to understand this. Things are either necessary, possible, or impossible. Okay? And knowing the difference between these three will give you a sound understanding of the exhaustive options that are available for one to be able to come to a sound realization of reality. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, this is obviously, alhamdulillah, we've now proven that there has to be a necessary being. And we know the route that we have taken in order to get there. Now, that becomes the first attribute of the 13 that we're going to take. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has existence, and His existence is necessary. He is wajib al-wujud, necessary of existence. Does that make sense? All right. Now this dovetails into the set of attributes that we're going to be looking at. No beginning, no end, no likeness to creation, no need, and that He's absolutely one. All right? So, this is now where the author, Imam al-Sanūsī rahimahullah ta'ala, says, and I think we took this, right? القدم والبقاء ويجب له تعالى القدم والبقاء وإلا كان محتاجا إلى الفاعل فيكون حادثا فيجب له من العجز ما وجب لسائر الحوادث بل يكون حينئذ وجوده مستحيلا لما يلزم على تقدير حدوثه من الدور أو تسلسل المستحيلين. We talked this last week as well, okay, so we're not going to necessarily sit here. Something that is necessary of existence cannot have a beginning. All good? If it began, it means something caused it, means it's not necessary. Can't have an end. Okay? Same thing applies. And then he gets into, so now existence, no beginning, no end. Yeah, you have a question?
Qidam and baqa, are these the same attribute or are these two separate attributes?
Two separate.
Okay.
Yeah. And what we're saying here is that actually, these are not attributes per se. Okay, I mean, I'm using the word, there's different words that could be used here, but these are affirmations that we're making that entail, right, from our understanding of God being the necessary being. All right? But think of it in that sense. There's some nuance to it. I don't want to confuse you. Can't have a beginning, can't have an end. Okay? قدم والبقاء. ويجب أن يكون تعالى مخالفا في ذاته وصفاته لكل ما سواه من الحوادث وإلا كان حادثا مثلها. So the third, he says it's also necessary that He, glorified and exalted is He, is dissimilar in His essence and attributes from all hawadith things, from all incipient things. Otherwise, He would be incipient like them. Okay? So we somewhat looked at this already, and in a sense, this is another entailment of the proof that we've just presented. We look at the world, and, for example, this table has a certain length, it has a certain height, it's created in a certain time, it can change, it can move around, etc. And all of these changes require causes. So we looked at the world and realized that it had features that could have been different from the way that they are right now. Since they could have been different, i.e., equal possibility of other features, it means that it needs to be determined by something external to itself. Then we say that that cause could not have gone infinitely into the past, etc. You know the drill, okay? Necessary being. Now, if these properties that we observed in the world that led us to this necessary conclusion of a necessary being, all right, were also said of Allah, if He was like them, that means that the thing that we said about the world would have to be said of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. that He needs a cause. Otherwise, we're being inconsistent. So if something has weight and size and motion, etc., it means that it's possible, it's contingent. And that entails the need for a cause. So if we're positing, okay, if we're going to be saying that there is a necessary being, it must be distinct from created things. It cannot be like them at all. There can't be weight to this thing. There's no size. There's no motion, okay? Which is an entailment of understanding the concept of necessary being. Because the features of a necessary being, something which is necessary in its being, does not resemble, in absolute terms, something which is possible in existence. All right? The thing which brought the world into existence cannot share in any of its features, because it would itself then necessitate a cause for its existence. So when we say that, we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot have size, He doesn't have a shape, He doesn't have an age, He doesn't exist in space and time. And this is made manifest actually when the Quraysh themselves confronted the Prophet ﷺ and asked him, Isfana Rabbak, right? Describe for us your Lord, because these were pagans. And so the idea for them was, we have gods, we know how they look, okay? You're telling us that you have a God. Tell us, what does this God look like? Get into the mindset, the paradigm that pagans would have confronted the Prophet ﷺ in relationship to. What does he look like? What's his lineage? And as a result of those questions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Al-Ikhlas. And He says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ. So what does your God look like? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Say that He is Allah, the uniquely one. Ahad. Ahad is a term which means He is one in Himself. The term is not the same, by the way, as wahid, meaning like numerically one. But it rather connotes the negation of multiplicity. He is not many things or composed of multiple parts that come together. Ahadiyya.
Nor is He a part of the whole.
Right.
He's not primal.
And then He says, Allahu Samad. A Samad is the one who is sought and does not seek for anything. And so He is sought in times of need, and He provides sustenance and assistance to those who are in need. Samad. And by the way, this also affirms the attribute of power and will and knowledge, but we're not there yet, okay? Lam yalid, He does not beget anything, i.e. nothing is born from Him. Walam yulad, and He is not born, He didn't begin. Walam yakun lahu kufu, He has no likeness unto Him. Kufu means likeness, right? In other words, there is absolutely no likeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Right? And we go back to the concept of oneness in this way. So if you notice, when they were asked to, when the Prophet ﷺ was asked by the Quraysh to describe God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals a number of ayat that primarily negate certain qualities or attributes, or describe Him based on what He is not. Right? Everybody see that? So He is unlike, He is dissimilar in His essence and attributes from all incipient things, from all contingent things like us. Right? Otherwise, He also then would be incipient, and if He's incipient, it means that He was caused, and like we said before, that's impossible. Okay? ويجب له تعالى أن يكون قائما بنفسه أي ذاتا موصوفا بالصفات غنيا عن المحل والفاعل إذ لو كان في محل لكان صفة فيلزم أن لا يتصف بالصفات الوجودية ولا لوازمها إذ لو قبلت الصفة صفة وجودية لزم أن لا تعرى عنها صفة كالذوات وذلك يستلزم التسلسل ودخول ما لا نهاية له في الوجود ولو كان محتاجا للفاعل لكان حادثا وهو محال. It's necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be self-sufficient. And then he gives you a definition of what self-sufficient means. So now this is we've gone through existence, no beginning, no end, dissimilar from creation, self-subsistent, self-sufficient, i.e., he has no need. He has no need at all. And he breaks this down again into an essential category. What he says is that he is not in need of a mahal or a mukhassis. He is not in need of a substance to sustain him, nor a fa'il, a cause to bring him into existence. So he explains this. Firstly, this concept of self-sufficiency, okay, comes from our knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Ghani. Al-Ghani. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Ghani, meaning that he is not in need. This is one of the names of God. No need of all things. No need of us, no need of the world, etc. Yeah? And when he says that, essentially you can demarcate this into two categories. He's saying, you can say that he is not something that exists in a substance, in a mahal, and he does not need something to bring him into existence. And so these two terms, a mahal and a fa'il, are actually extremely important. A mahal actually has two meanings. It can be in a place, makan, or it can be in a subject, what's known as a mawdu' in Arabic. So the subject, al-mawdu' is al-qa'imu bi nafsihi. Okay, so for example, this book, what color is it? Right. It's like a cream and blue, right? Some other colors to it too. The mahal, okay, of the color is in this book. In other words, blue doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It has to exist in something. Correct? Does everybody see that? Cream as a color does not exist in a vacuum. It has to exist in a mahal. So the general term that they use to understand this concept to include bodies, physical objects, and non-bodies is a mahal. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. And then a fa'il, he also says he's not in need of a fa'il, i.e. a mukhassis, a determiner. Something that determines a thing is going to be characterized with this other thing. Okay? So, you can have the following. You can have things which need a mahal and a fa'il. So like, for example, you have this black table made by a carpenter. Okay? The black needs a mahal, i.e. the table. And the fa'il, the mukhassis, is the carpenter, right? The carpenter put this together. Then you have things which need a mahal and that don't need a mukhassis. And things which don't need a mahal and need a mukhassis. So like the table itself, okay, it doesn't need a substance to exist in. All right? It's not like color or the other properties that we're talking about here. And then you have things that don't need a mahal and don't need a mukhassis, and that is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So essentially, a truly independent being is one who isn't dependent on either something else to bring it into existence or something else to exist in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not dependent on space and time or anything, right, to exist within in the same ways that we are. We are because we're physical objects. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a physical object. Everybody clear on that? All good?
Is all that inside the word samad? Or what you just said?
All of that can be derived from the word samad. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I ask just a thermodynamic question? So
Ooh.
this idea that everything in the universe, let's call it in the caused universe, is either matter or energy. So can we go as far as, so you said it can't be contained in matter. What about what we...
Well, so we would still say that that's a physical object.
We would say what is?
Matter.
Correct. So I've ruled that out.
Okay.
Just as I ruled out space and time.
Mhm.
But what about energy?
It's also
Also ruled out, right?
a physical object. See, that's why I used spatial location. Mutahayyiz is the term that they use in the Arabic language. And the hayyiz is something that is in space, like it's spatially located.
So we could even rule out force.
Exactly. In other words, the entirety of the world, as we said before, everything within it exists of physical objects and the properties of physical
Including
objects.
the interactions of those things. 'Cause
And the
that's
interactions
really
of those,
what a force is.
well, the interactions of those things, then we would say the relationships that they have with one another are also going to be possible.
Right.
They're possible of existence, contingent, which means that the relationships that they have with each other are also possible of existence. And we're actually going to get to that. That's a huge point, by the way.
Yeah, so I don't know if this question is premature, but so by virtue of that, we can't say Allah has an influence over us. Now we're
No, it would be
saying
the opposite.
we have an influence over him?
No. No, we would say that no thing actually has any real influence over us other than Allah. Because if we're saying that the world is made up of contingent things, possible things, and the relationships that they have are also possible, it means that they're not actually efficating anything.
So can I,
Like this pen, when I let go of it, okay, in and of itself did not make itself fall.
It disappeared.
Well, yeah. Okay? I.e., the relationship that this pen had, okay, with the space around me here, when I let go of this object, all right, we're saying is possible. That's one of the hardest things for Muslims to begin to think about when they're learning theology for the first time. Because the repetitions that we're seeing in this world are repetitions that we assume are being efficated by these things themselves. And what this theology is teaching us is no, of themselves, they do nothing. It's only when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the falling in this pen at the time that my hands let it go, that it falls down. And if He wanted to let it stay here when I let go, no problem. If He wanted to let it go up, no problem. And so that's how, obviously, we substantiate the notion of miracles and, other aspects that we'll get into.
do you mind if I follow up? I'm sorry. I'm having a language problem. Like you're saying Allah causes the pen to fall, which suggests some sort of direct influence on the pen.
Yes.
But it's equally possible to recognize an indirect influence on the pen. He didn't actually interact with that pen at that moment. He set up a system that interacts with that pen
So
in
we'll-
accordance to his.
Yeah.
So however you want to look at it. So whether we're going to go with it, like he actually did talk to the pen, he didn't.
Yeah.
I have a.
No. So these are great questions.
Okay.
They're coming up.
All right.
And they're coming up particularly when we talk about tawheed, the attribute of wahdaniyah.
Oh wow.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Well,
just
we-
give me 1 second
But
and
you
we'll
got
get
it,
to it.
Hannah.
Yeah.
I took her correct.
So my question is really related to yours. I think a couple of weeks ago we were talking about why something is possible. One of the things that you said was something is changing that makes it contingent.
Right.
About how space is changing, therefore it's contingent. But when we say the necessary existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's creating this thing, that is some form of change, right?
No. Why?
I mean, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing something. That itself is or are we arguing that dynamic, something, that change is dynamic and that itself is something separate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is that the relationship with property?
So this is a very good question as well, and it's going to come later. the way that we talk about it, the ulama of kalam will call it ta'alluq, which I guess you can say is like a cosmic connection. Allah's power and will is connected to things in this world, right, that bring about the type of effects that we see. But He Himself is not changing. He Himself is not being affected by anything. Yeah.
The word ta'alluq in Urdu is relationship. So.
Right, there's a relationship there, yes. Good. Let me just get through this one part really quickly because then we'll close out, and inshallah anyone who wants to continue to dialogue here, we can do that. But he gives the proof. So he says, if he existed in something else, he would have been a property of that thing. So he's giving you the proof here. Why can't he have existed in something else? Well, if he would have been a property of that thing. Okay? Then he could not himself have a whole set of properties, which is a very interesting way of, so like will and power and existence, right? And actually brought the world into existence because he'd be the property of something else. And he continues and says, for if a property could itself have properties in existence, it could not reveal itself like what could be said of an essence that has properties. So the argument here is that if he existed in something, he would have been a property. All right? Like color is a property of this table, okay? Existing in the table, right? And what he's saying is that attributes don't have attributes. Attributes don't have attributes. It's not like the attribute of knowledge has like arms and legs, etc. In other words, attributes are things that are said of something else. They're not said of each other. They don't exist in another attribute. But the point is that God himself has attributes. And so he can't himself be an attribute. Why not? And so Imam al-Sanūsī then gives the evidence for this. And he says, that would imply an infinite regress. And it would actually allow for a type of extramental infinity, an actual infinity. And if he was in need of a cause, he says, then he would be hadith, he would be incipient, he would have begun. Okay? And that's impossible. So he brings about another interesting sort of infinite regress argument into this. So imagine if existence is an actual thing. And we actually talked a little bit about this. So for example, we know that Umar has existence. Now, if we posit that there is Umar and then there's Umar's existence, i.e. that Umar's existence has existence, that means that the existence of Umar's existence also has existence. And Umar's existence, and so on, right? Which would go on ad infinitum, and we're back to infinite regress. It would be like positing that Umar has a number of different existences, but you don't, right? As far as I can tell. Yeah. Oh God. He has one existence. He has one existence. So he uses this argument to show that the necessary being must be independent of subsisting in something. And obviously, he can't be created by something else because that would mean that he's not necessary, right? And that's that. The final attribute in this category of what are known as negating attributes is oneness, wahdaniyya. It's a very important attribute. We're not going to go into it now, obviously, because we're out of time. But that's where we'll begin next week, بإذن الله تعالى. وصلى اللهم وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Any questions, comments, concerns? Was there a question here that I didn't take? I just want to make sure. Okay, sorry, ladies first, yeah.
So earlier you were talking about al-mahal, so something existing in a place or in a subject.
Yeah.
Is that kind of like the reason of, when you're talking about like color theory and light, does it apply to that as well?
Sure, yeah. Yes. Very good. Because it has spatial extension, right? It's located spatially. And we're saying that the necessary being is outside of that. Yeah.
So, the existence of God makes sense, and it's fine and dandy. My cousin and I were having a similar conversation where we came to the same conclusion, subhanAllah. But then we started talking about, how can we verify that any other perception other than our own is actually real? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing to think about, like,
It's not strange. It's not strange.
in the sense that, like, it's strange to me personally, and it's very, like, lonely, knowing that like, there's no way to verify, like, I know I'm talking to you, but the feeling that I have in my body speaking to you, how do I know that that's the same for you in that sense? Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
is there an Islamic sort of angle on that?
There is.
Okay.
Stop watching The Matrix. No, no, that's we actually did this in the Munqidh class. So if you go to the series that we did on Imam al-Ghazali's Deliver from Error, or the Deliverance from Error, Munqidh min al-Dalal of Imam al-Ghazali, he himself gives a treatment of this, and he explains why that is a false precept in general to even think about. It goes back to really understanding this. Like, man, if you get this, I'm telling you, like, you're a genius. In the world we live in today, I'm really not playing this up. Wallahi al-azim, if you really know this, necessary, possible, impossible, you are a genius in the world that we live in today. Which is the reason why I keep saying we need to teach our kids this. All right? It makes sense of so much. You would be like overwhelmed if you knew. But it goes back to this concept. Basically what Imam al-Ghazali says is that he went through this kind of like crisis of skepticism. Not that he was an actual skeptic per se. He said, I just got to a place where I began to ask that question in particular and others as well. How do I know that there isn't some realm where the things that I come to know in the ways that I know them right now are not completely different in that realm and would then be superior to the way that I come to understand things rationally in this realm? And how do I even know anything at all then as a result of that? Okay, do I even exist? Do you exist? So on and so forth. Okay, yeah. So what he basically says then is that he got out of this. First and foremost, he says, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put nur in his heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put a light in his heart that allowed for him to be completely in submission, a kind of trust, a reliance on the way that things are. You're not panicking, okay? And the first part of that is that you let go of trying to control it. And everybody knows that, that's tried this, right? When you continually try to control something, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and then you finally like, just let it go. And as soon as you let it go, it's interesting. It's like everything begins to unravel and untangle, and you're good again. So that also has to be applied in relationship to the way that we intellectually come to an understanding of existence. Right? But that's not it. What he says is that you can come to know things as we went through in the beginning of this course, okay? Either by means of darura or nazar. So when we talked about knowing in the three different types of judgments that we have, we said you can know something empirically, you can know something from a lawgiver, right? Normative judgments. And you can know something using pure reason, right? What's known as rational judgments. Rational judgments are of three types. Something can be necessary, something can be impossible, and something can be possible or contingent. All right? When he began to define for you what is necessary, what is impossible, what is contingent, he said that you can know something is necessary vis-a-vis these two routes, i.e. you know it through some self-evident means, which is what darura is, or through an inferential mean. through some argument that takes you to the necessary conclusion of that thing. All right? 1 is half of 2. That's darura. If you understand the language that I just used to indicate that meaning, you have to arrive there. It's necessary. You cannot arrive anywhere else. Okay? 1 is half of a sixth of 12. See, that's the face that you should be making. A sixth of 12 is 2, half of that is 1. Yeah, it's 1. Okay, yes, good. That's nazar. That's inference. Okay? It doesn't happen immediately. You have to go through some process of reflection and contemplation to arrive there. All right? Now, what Imam Ghazali is saying is that there are certain things in this world that are darura. And what darura means, the definition of something that is daruri, okay, self-evident, or non-inferential, one can say non-demonstrable is another way of saying that, is that you don't need to provide evidence for its truth. It is its truth. It itself is its truth. Its evidence is within itself. It's self-evident. Okay? Like what? Like I'm here right now. That is daruri. You immediately know that that's true. Okay? Now, this is what Imam Ghazali is saying. He's saying people that end up in skepticism, they assume that things that are daruri can have explanations in the same way that inferential truths have explanations. In other words, you begin to try to prove that I exist. No, that's non-demonstrable. Non-demonstrable by its nature means it does not need demonstration. It itself is already true in and of itself. When you assume that you can provide demonstration for something that is non-demonstrable, Imam Ghazali says, you will always end up in skepticism. Finished. It's one of the most brilliant things I've ever read in my entire life. He actually, anybody here who's done philosophy, he precedes Wittgenstein by obviously centuries. Okay, but Wittgenstein begins to think about things in that way. And it's almost like when you read Wittgenstein, you're kind of like, bro, you read Ghazali. Like, so much of what this guy was saying actually is like, you had to have taken this from the Muslim mutakallimun, because they were the only ones who were really saying this kind of stuff. So, and this is exactly what he says, right? Does everybody understand that point? Do you understand that point?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, good.
So, I understand this. Now, after this conversation that happened a few days after, I came across something, Zeno's paradox?
Yes.
For those that don't know, so like, Zeno's paradox is like, let's say my hand is here, and I have the distance this way, and have the distance, and have the distance, and have the distance. The assumption, or the inference is that my hands will never touch, but I can still clap my hands, I can still close the infinity. So in that regard, how does that work? Because this is
Because infinity is only theoretical. I mean, it just goes to prove that the impossibility of infinite regress is real. Which is actually the reason why most people, atheists, philosophers, and scientists who for a very long time wanted to substantiate actual infinities, really no longer do. And so you'll find people like Graham Oppy, for example, Australian philosopher, who's an atheist, but says, no, there has to be a necessary being. There has to be a necessary being. But he tries to begin then to say, but that necessity can be given to matter, for example. Or, we can begin to think about it void of this kind of God that the theists want to try to postulate. But he actually grants the fact that it's very reasonable, absolutely plausible why the majority of the world believe in God in this particular fashion, if they believe it in this particular fashion. He says, because it's completely logical, right? Which goes against what so many of us assume from that particular segment of the community, the atheist community, who constantly talk about believers and theists as like, morons and people who don't use reason and logic and common sense and da-da-da-da. That's, don't fall for that. A lot of really good people in the field, and that's the difference, that people in the field speak a very different type of rhetoric than, your Sam Harris's and your Dawkins and these guys. This is all a show, and they're not taken seriously in any philosophy department, in many departments that look into metaphysics and these kind of questions. Would it be wrong to say that Allah is infinite? No, that's a necessity, because the necessary being has to be infinite. Something that, if your existence is necessary, means it cannot go out of existence without it not being that thing anymore.
A good one could be if you're ever get on planes, like I fly like short boat like every week or something for work and stuff. So, you get scared when that plane shakes. You're like, Allah help me. You know what I mean? And when you're landing, you're scared. So, that's, get on a plane scares you. So.
Yeah. And that's an intrinsic reaction. Yeah, it's one of the things that people talk about often. Everybody good? No more existential questions? Yeah. Yeah, cool.
I am just curious, because you mentioned some of the Muslim philosophers like Ibn Sina posited that the world is both eternal and cause.
How did he do it?
Yeah, how? Because it's just like it's a logical contradiction. So how did they substantiate their argument?
Their conception of God is one that, kind of in the sense of, I forget, was it you, Hajar, or actually, I think that you talked about. No. What's your name again? Sorry. Siddiqa? Sabiqa. So Sabiqa, you're the one who said, isn't God changing if he's doing all of this, right? So that actually was something that the Muslim philosophers wanted to try to posit against Ahl Sunnah. If you're saying that God began the world, you're saying that there was a point in time where he wasn't doing anything, and then he began to do something, which means that he's changing, which means that he's not necessary anymore. Therefore, they thought of God as causally prior and ontologically coterminous with the world. I know that's huge language. Basically what he's saying is that, like, do you guys see this ring on my finger? Okay, ready? Which one moved first?
The hand or the ring?
Yeah.
They move together.
You see that? So this is actually the way that they conceptualize what's happening with God and his relationship to the world. Like this hand and the finger. If God exists, then it necessarily entails that the world exists. And it's emanating from God. And the sort of emanation scheme then is reciprocal in relationship to his very nature. So as a necessary being, he is emanating to the world, which then postulates that the world itself is necessary, okay, but is dependent on the necessary being to bring it into existence.
So then that would do away with the argument of Allah being separate from the world.
Yeah, in many ways. I mean, they still would give you a kind of very interesting diagram as to how that all works, but that was more or less the conception. So the world is actually eternal, still caused by God in the sense that there's a kind of causal priority, right, that like the hand has over the ring. It is, because it's the one moving it. And that's basically what the Sunnis would say. I mean, the real blow came from Imam al-Ghazali. Again, like Imam al-Ghazali was just boxing people, like just left and right, giving us a tradition that was like amazing. What he said was, what does that do to God's will? Can God will creation into existence anymore? No. It's just a necessary entailment of him, which means he doesn't have a will. So how do you understand the verses in the Quran that talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? هو يفعل ما يشاء ويختار, right? هو فعال لما يريد. All of that goes away. And they begin to kind of, play the mental gymnastics game to work it out. So that becomes the way that they basically substantiate this concept, and we would refute it on the basis of logical impossibility. And obviously this is in the Quran itself. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقِ. Say, traverse the world and see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began creating it. Began it, created it, right? I.e. from non-existence to existence. Yeah.
Can't you also, anyone who kind of has an issue with, creation began and at some point Allah was not creating and he just started creating. Can't you also just negate that argument by saying, well, in saying that you're applying time to God as well?
Yes.
So because he's outside of time, you're not able to conceptualize that he's outside of time and what that means, but...
Very good. Yes. Because time is something that entails from huduth, right? And so the very idea of thinking, well, what was God doing all those years before he created? It's an absurdity, right? Because now you're thinking about God. And, this is not, Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd are giants, so we're not taking that away from them. But these are disagreements. And there are also a number of other things that, if you look at Ibn Sina a little bit more closely in the different interpretations that scholars have had of him, he's also postulating a potentially different type of argument, which, in and of itself was also refuted by people like Razi and others. So, brilliant scholars, but we would disagree with them, and those positions became, heretical positions to hold.
I have a question. It's kind of like the end of the world in the Quran, so it's something's going to spread what's that called? The plant that you grow on and...
I don't know.
No, it's like a lily or something. There you go.
Dandelion.
Yeah, and it says somewhere in the verse that it goes over Earth, and then we all have but this is probably going to be after we all die, but maybe 1,000 years later.
I don't know. Allahu A'lam. I don't have those answers. I just pray that God is merciful with us, inshallah, when that time comes. We'll end here. صلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. بارك الله فيكم.